There is something unspeakably painful about being left behind by those you once loved, with all the innocence and sincerity your heart could offer. Not because you didn't survive it, you did, but because you still remember the sound of their footsteps as they walked away from everything you gave so freely. The silence they left behind still lingers in the quiet corners of your soul, echoing with questions you were too kind to ask. Why did they leave? Was I not enough? Did all that love really mean nothing to them? The world will tell you to move on, that people come and go, that life is a rotating door of connections, always swinging open and closed. But you and I both know it wasn't just someone who left. It was them, the one you trusted, the one who once called you family, the one who looked you in the eye and promised they would stay. And maybe they didn't leave in one swift motion. Maybe they left piece by piece, withdrawing their presence like the sea recedes from the shore before a great storm. You sensed it, but you still hoped, still clung, still prayed they'd return to who they were when they first found you. And then they didn't. Abandonment is not merely the act of departure. It's the betrayal of expectation. It's standing in a room full of memories and realizing no one is coming back to claim them. It's being left to carry the weight of what was supposed to be shared. And in the middle of that desolate space, where trust was broken and love went unanswered, you were met with something far more profound than human loyalty. You were met with the quiet presence of God. When everyone else left, He stayed. There's a sacred mystery in how God positions Himself in the shadows of our suffering. He does not demand the spotlight. He does not knock loudly to announce His entrance. He waits until your heart has been so emptied by the world that even the smallest whisper of His presence is unmistakable. And when you finally notice, it's not because you are strong enough to find Him. It's because you had nothing left but Him. That moment when you are at your weakest, when the tears have blurred your vision and your hands tremble under the burden of grief, God bends low, not to lecture, not to reprimand, but to hold, to weep with you, to remind you that He has never left your side, not for a moment. And while they may have walked away with no explanation, He was there for every unanswered question. While they slept peacefully after breaking you, He stayed awake, watching over the pieces of your heart. Some people were never meant to stay. That's not cruelty, it's clarity. God saw what you could not. He saw the corrosion behind their charisma. He saw the deception that lived beneath their words. And though your heart longed for their presence, God longed for your freedom. So He allowed the breaking, not to punish you, but to protect you. Because what they gave was temporary affection, but what He gives is eternal belonging. You didn't lose them, you were rescued from them. But let's be honest, rescue rarely feels like deliverance in the moment. It feels like drowning. It feels like rejection. It feels like being left to fend for yourself when all you wanted was to be understood. And yet, God was writing something holy in your heartbreak. He was carving out a space within you where no human betrayal could reach, and only His love could heal. He was sanctifying the loneliness, not to punish you with isolation, but to consecrate your heart for intimacy with Him. The absence of people often becomes the presence of God. And that presence does not come empty-handed. He comes with healing, with truth, with revelations that shatter the lies you've believed for too long. That you're hard to love, that you're easy to leave, that you're forgettable. No. God exposes the lie by proving the opposite. He stays through your silence, through your bitterness, through your breakdowns, and in doing so He declares over your life a truth no abandonment can erase. You are worth staying for. The world may see your pain as weakness, but God sees it as sacred. To be wounded by those you love and still be willing to love again That is not naivety. That is divine courage. The very heart of God beats in you. A heart that gets pierced yet never stops giving. A heart that bleeds but still believes. A heart that grieves but refuses to grow cold. And if you ever wondered why your pain felt so unbearable, perhaps it's because your heart was never ordinary. It was always chosen, always holy, always carrying something eternal. And what they rejected, God redeemed. You may feel like their leaving left you in ruins, but God is building something glorious from that rubble. He does not waste pain. He does not overlook tears. Every lonely night, every unanswered message, every silent scream into the void, they are seen, counted, recorded in heaven's book, and in ways you can't yet imagine, God is preparing restoration. Not the return of what was, but the arrival of what's better, because they hurt you and left. But God stayed, and He's just getting started. You see, it's in the aftermath of human absence that divine presence becomes unmistakably real. When everyone else forgets your name, God engraves it deeper on His hands. When the echo of footsteps walking away becomes louder than your heartbeat, God speaks in the stillness with a voice that cuts through despair. Not loudly, not to startle, but with the calm certainty of someone who has always known how the story ends. He doesn't compete with the noise. They made enough of that when they blamed you, ignored you, left you to explain what they chose not to understand. God doesn't ask you to fix the ruins. He asks you to let Him walk among them. He sees your pain not as a mess to hide, but as ground made holy by your endurance. Those broken places where others mocked you or minimized you, those are the places He plants seeds of purpose. He knows you didn't ask to be strong. You simply weren't given a choice. And while they moved on quickly, acting as though your loyalty was disposable, He stayed behind, sifting through the ashes of what they left, gently whispering, "There's more. You're not done. I'm still here." When they left, they took their version of the story with them. They painted you as too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. But God saw what they couldn't. He saw the quiet strength it took to keep showing up, the inner wars you fought while wearing a smile, the prayers you whispered between breakdowns. He heard the groans of your spirit when you had no more words, and, unlike them, He didn't misunderstand your heart. He didn't weaponize your vulnerability. He held it. Because where the world sees weakness, God sees worship. You loved purely, you trusted deeply, you gave generously, and they walked away like it was nothing. But what you gave was never for them to validate. It was seen by the only one who matters. God doesn't forget those who give from the heart. He doesn't dismiss tears cried behind closed doors. He doesn't overlook kindness that went unrewarded. He keeps score differently, not with pride or punishment, but with eternal memory, a record of love given even when it wasn't returned. Some of your greatest offerings were made in private, and heaven noticed. That moment you chose peace over revenge, that time you kept silent to protect someone who didn't deserve your loyalty, that night you wept for someone who didn't weep for you. These weren't wasted moments. They were sacred sacrifices, burnt offerings laid on an invisible altar. And God, in all His holiness, received every one of them. They left you when it no longer served them to stay. But God doesn't stay because of what He gets. He stays because of who He is. The permanence of His love is not dependent on your performance. It's not shaken by your doubt or threatened by your questions. When you whispered, "Why me?" He didn't scold you. He sat beside you. When you asked, "What did I do wrong?" He wrapped you in silence, not because there was no answer, but because sometimes comfort speaks louder than correction. He doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to be honest. The people who left may have convinced you that your worth was tied to their approval, that your value was conditional, that your voice didn't matter. But God dismantles every lie they planted, not by arguing with them, but by staying, by choosing you in your most shattered state, by loving you when there was nothing left to offer, when the smile was gone, when the optimism died, when your faith faltered. He loves you there, still loves you now. And that love isn't fragile. It doesn't flinch when you fall apart. It doesn't leave when the path gets hard. It doesn't threaten to disappear if you don't hold yourself together. So while they may have walked away thinking you'd crumble, God is rebuilding you into something unshakable. Not because you have something to prove, but because He has something to reveal. His presence in your pain is not a consolation prize. It's the main prize, the treasure hidden in the field of your heartbreak, the pearl buried in the wreckage of betrayal. The world may not applaud you. They may never understand what you survived, but God knows. God saw it all, and He stayed, not just as a silent observer, but as an active redeemer. He's not just holding your hand, He's writing a new story with it. One that begins not with "they left," but with "He stayed." And that changes everything. Because if God stayed when they left, then their departure was never the end. It was the beginning. Do you know the strange comfort of sitting alone and realizing you are not, in fact, alone? That though no footsteps echo in the hallway and no voice calls your name from the other side of the door, there is still a presence, gentle, watchful, unyielding, so real it could only be divine. That is the companionship of God, the one who sits with you, even when your tears don't make it to your cheeks, even when the sorrow is so old it no longer demands expression. That is who stayed when they left. That is who leaned closer when others leaned away. People often abandon what they do not understand. They flee from what requires patience, depth, responsibility. They walk out the moment they cannot mold you into their convenience. And you, dear soul, you were never meant to be convenient. You were meant to be cherished. Not simplified or silenced, but seen, truly seen. And that is what God does with you. He doesn't look at your wounds and see weakness. He sees evidence of your survival. He doesn't examine your scars and call them ugly. He calls them sacred. Every mark left by their departure is now a monument of His staying power. Every broken piece they left behind is now a vessel He fills with meaning. When they walked out, they thought they were closing a chapter. But God took the pen from their hand and began a better one. One where your story no longer revolves around who hurt you, but around who healed you. You are not the abandoned, you are the anointed. There is a difference. The world writes off those who bleed in silence, but heaven crowns them. You were never discarded. You were preserved. Hidden from the eyes of those who only wanted to use your light without honoring its source. And now, in the stillness, in the silence they left you with, God is speaking truths that were drowned out by their noise. He is reminding you of who you are apart from what they made you feel. You are not too much. You are not unworthy. You are not forgettable. You are not hard to love. You are not someone to be left. You are someone to be pursued. And while they couldn't see that, God always could. That's why He didn't leave. That's why He never turned His face from you. Even when your own reflection became difficult to look at, He beheld you with the eyes of a loving Father, a loyal friend, an unshakable Savior. They left you with questions, and God stayed with answers. Not always the kind written in ink, not always in words you can repeat, but in the quiet reassurance that you are held. in the little signs, the perfectly timed message, the warmth of sunlight through the window, the inexplicable peace when nothing externally has changed. These are not coincidences. These are reminders that even if you lost everything they took with them, God remained. And not only did He remain, He redeemed. Because that's what God does best. He takes the very thing that tried to destroy you and turns it into the soil where something eternal is planted. He allows the leaving, not because you deserved abandonment, but because you were meant for alignment. Alignment with His purpose, His presence, His promises. And none of those things require the presence of people who were never meant to carry your heart. You don't need them back to move forward. You don't need their apology to be free. You don't need their permission to heal. You don't need their return to feel whole. What you need is already with you and has been all along. The love that surpasses understanding, the peace that guards your heart, the hope that cannot be killed, only hidden until the right season. There is a sacredness to being left that only those who have been abandoned can truly understand. It creates a space that no human presence can satisfy. And in that space, God builds something unshakable. Faith not based on feelings. Love not dependent on others. Identity not shaped by praise or rejection. A foundation so strong that no storm can undo it. They may have thought they ended you, but what they did was awaken you. They stirred something in your soul that comfort never could, a deep awareness of who truly matters, a shift from dependency to divine intimacy, from craving presence to craving purpose. They took what they could and walked away, but they could not take what was never theirs to own. They could not take your worth. They could not take your calling. They could not take the God who stood by you in the ruins. And that God, He is rebuilding something far greater, not just a return to what was, but a transformation into what can be. Not just recovery, but resurrection. Not just survival, but significance. He doesn't restore you to the version of yourself that begged to be loved. He builds you into the one who knows she is already loved, unconditionally, eternally, without end. They hurt you and left, but God, He stayed, and now He's lifting you, not just from where you fell, but to heights they could never take you. He's not just mending your heart, He's enlarging it. He's not just silencing the pain, He's turning it into a voice that others will hear and find healing, a story that others will read and find courage, a life that no longer revolves around absence, but radiates from presence. There is a beauty that only sorrow can awaken, not the kind that sparkles or shouts, but the kind that glows softly in the darkness, a quiet radiance forged in the furnace of abandonment. When people leave you at your lowest, they imagine your downfall. What they don't realize is that God begins His greatest work in the silence they leave behind. The empty space they created is now being filled with the presence of the one who never leaves. The abandonment that sought to break you is now the altar where intimacy with God is kindled. You thought you were losing everything, but you were being returned to what is eternal. For so long you might have built your joy on the shoulders of their presence. You may have attached your worth to how they responded, how they smiled at you, how they acknowledged you. But human affection, though warm, is often fickle. The same lips that blessed you one day may curse you the next. The same hands that held yours in assurance may later release you without a word. And while your spirit wrestles with the ache of that betrayal, God stays. He does not flinch at your confusion. He does not shrink from your sadness. He does not leave when the answers don't come quickly. He is not like them. Where they required your strength to stay interested, God leans in when you are weak. Where they demanded your perfection to remain close, God draws near when you're most undone. He saw you in your lowest moment, the one even your mirror refused to reflect. And he whispered, "I still choose you." That is not human love, that is divine covenant. And that covenant will never be broken. Not by your doubts, not by your despair, not by the voice in your head that still wonders if maybe it was your fault they left. God does not partner with the accusations that wounded you. He partners with truth. And the truth is, they left for reasons that had little to do with your value and everything to do with their vision. They could not see the depth of your soul. They could not perceive the calling on your life. They loved the parts of you that served their need, but they did not love you completely. But God sees it all and loves it all. He sees the strength beneath your silence. He sees the purity beneath your pain. He sees the loyalty that remained even when it was no longer rewarded. And where others treated you as forgettable, He treats you as unforgettable. They moved on without you, but God was already moving ahead of you, preparing a place where their absence could no longer touch your peace. There is a sacred strength that rises when the heart finally accepts this. They were never your anchor. God was. And perhaps that is why He allowed them to leave, so you would finally know who truly holds you. Not their attention, not their praise, not their promises, but His presence. He will never need to be reminded of your worth. He crafted it. He will never overlook your pain. He collects every tear. He will never ask you to be anyone other than who He created you to be. That is love, not a performance, not a transaction, but a place where you can breathe again, a place where you are safe again. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is not someone staying. It is God revealing who should never have had access to your heart in the first place. They were in your life for a chapter, not a lifetime. And perhaps the greatest grace is not their return, but their release. Let them go not in bitterness, but in blessing. Not because they were right, but because God is good. He is too faithful to allow you to stay, tethered to something that cannot sustain the weight of your destiny. He is too kind to let you remain in spaces where your soul is suffocating just to be seen. You were never meant to shrink to be loved. You were meant to expand in the presence of unconditional love. And that's what God offers. Not just healing from what they did, but identity beyond what they called you. You are not the rejected. You are the redeemed. You are not the forgotten. You are the favored. You are not the abandoned. You are the adopted. In every name they used to reduce you, God speaks a greater name to raise you. You may never receive the apology you deserve. You may never hear them say, "I was wrong." But what they fail to recognize, heaven already affirmed. And when you stand in the quiet of night, when memories rush back and your heart aches for answers, remember this: the one who matters never left. The one who knows you deeper than you know yourself never walked away. He stayed. And not only did he stay, he's transforming everything their absence tried to destroy. This is not just a survival story. This is the beginning of your restoration. Where pain once sat on the throne of your mind, peace is taking its place. Where confusion once clouded your days, clarity is rising. Where the silence they left behind once haunted you, now it sings with the sound of divine presence. He is still here, and that changes everything. There is a holy defiance growing within you now, a strength not born of anger or revenge, but of divine remembrance. You are remembering who you were before their departure shook your worth. You are remembering who walks beside you, even when others flee. You are remembering the quiet truth that has always lived beneath the noise of their absence, that God has never needed an audience to do His greatest work in you. He chooses the private places, the low moments, the emptied soul. That's where He does the miracle. And it's there, when the world has stopped watching, that He begins to rebuild you. Not hastily, not in pieces that pretend wholeness, but deliberately, with intention, with the care of a potter who refuses to discard the vessel, no matter how shattered it appears. He reshapes what was crushed. He reclaims what was used. He restores what was torn away. He creates beauty, not in spite of the cracks, but through them. Because when they left you, they thought they were leaving behind something finished. But God saw a canvas. God saw a cathedral. The pain you carry is not proof that you were weak. It is proof that you loved. And love is never wasted. It always finds its way home, even if it returns through a different door than the one it left through. You may never see your kindness return from the same hands that betrayed it, but heaven is already multiplying it in places your eyes haven't seen yet. What was sown in tears will not be harvested in vain. What was sacrificed in silence will not be forgotten by the one who rewards in secret. So do not despise the ache. Let it teach you. Let it teach you that love is not dependent on who receives it, but on who gives it. Let it teach you that your heart is not weak for still hoping, still believing, still yearning. Let it teach you that loyalty is not a flaw, that tenderness is not a liability, that faith is not foolishness. Let it teach you that what they couldn't handle in you was the very thing that makes you a vessel of heaven's goodness. You don't need to erase the memory of them. You only need to remove the lie they left behind, the lie that you were easy to leave, the lie that you weren't enough, the lie that something about you pushed them away. No. What pushed them away was the light in you that revealed the shadows in them. And rather than face that truth, they chose to go. Let them, because what they couldn't face in you, God is now using to illuminate your path forward. You are no longer waiting for their return. You are rising in God's embrace. You are no longer living to be chosen. You are living as someone already chosen. There is no room in your soul now for those who measure love by convenience. There is no space in your spirit for those who borrow your loyalty and repay it with absence. The temple of your heart has been cleansed by tears, and now only what is sacred may enter. God is guarding the gates, not in cruelty, but in kindness, not to keep people out, but to ensure that only the right ones can stay. And yes, some days you may still ache for them. That's all right. Love does not disappear just because someone walks away. But what you must remember is this: their departure is not your definition. Their absence is not your ending. What they couldn't carry, God carries with ease. What they dropped, He lifts. What they shattered, He rebuilds. Do not look back for those who made comfort feel like a condition. Do not chase those who only loved the parts of you that didn't challenge them. Do not water yourself down hoping they will find you drinkable again. The living waters you carry were never meant for those who spit it out, to sip poison elsewhere. Let them go, not in hatred, in peace, because your story is not anchored in who left. It is anchored in who stayed. And he stayed, through the worst, through the weeping, through the waiting. He stayed when your bed felt too big for your broken heart. He stayed when the nights felt like caves, echoing with your own questions. He stayed when you blamed yourself, when you begged, when you broke. He stayed not because you were always faithful, but because He always is. He never once considered leaving you in the wreckage others caused. He never once flinched at your unraveling. He remained, and in His staying you are now safe to rise again. You were not forsaken. You were protected. What looked like loss was actually love. Love in its highest form, the kind that doesn't always look pretty, but always proves true. This is not the end of your story. This is the place where the light begins to break through the cracks they left. This is the ground where joy takes root in the soil watered by your tears. This is the place where God bends low and reminds you, I'm still here. I always was, and I'm not going anywhere. The miracle, you see, was never in their return. It was always in God's refusal to leave. In a world where love is often bartered, negotiated, and withdrawn, the unwavering nearness of God is a revelation that shatters every false belief you once held about what it means to be seen, cherished, and known. His love does not wait for you to prove your worth. It declares it. His presence does not need to be earned. It is given freely, wholly, and without hesitation. They left you behind. They abandoned the garden of your soul when it was still blooming in spring, afraid of the responsibility that beauty demands. But God, He knelt beside the fallen petals, gently gathered what remained, and whispered, "Let's begin again." Not with resentment, but with grace. Not to restore the same version of you, but to unveil the one you were always meant to be. He is not rebuilding you into who you were before they hurt you. He is forming you into someone stronger, wiser, softer in the right places, and sharper in the ones that matter. Someone who no longer finds identity in being chosen by fragile hands, but in being held by everlasting arms. You once feared the silence, now it has become your sanctuary. You once begged for them to notice you again, now you realize God never took His eyes off you. In every moment you thought you were falling apart, you were falling into Him. You were falling into truth, into healing, into the arms of a love so persistent it stood unshaken while everything else collapsed. That kind of love doesn't retreat. It doesn't flinch. It does not walk out when the lights dim and the tears begin to fall. It stays. It stays and it transforms. To let the world say what it wants, let those who left believe what they will, let those who never tried to understand you speak whatever version of the story makes them feel better. None of it changes the truth written over your life in heaven's ink. You were never alone. You were never forsaken. You were never unloved. You were watched over by the only one who sees all, knows all, and still chooses to stay. And in that staying, something holy happened. You stopped chasing closure and started embracing clarity. You stopped asking why they left and began asking why you ever thought you needed them to stay. You stopped reaching for the hands that let you fall and lifted your eyes to the one who was already holding you. You stopped needing to explain your heart and started living from the place where God already understood it. That is the beginning of true healing, not when they come back, but when you no longer need them to. Not when the pain disappears, but when it no longer dictates your identity. Not when the past is forgotten, but when its power to define your future is finally broken. And that is where you are now, standing in the quiet light of dawn, no longer waiting for anyone to complete what God has already finished. You are whole, not because they stayed, but because He did. Surrender the ache may still whisper, some memories may still sting, but they no longer hold you. You have been held by something greater, carried by a love that never needed to be earned, a love that covered your shame, embraced your sorrow, and spoke your name even when you couldn't remember who you were anymore. And now you remember. You remember that their leaving did not erase your value. You remember that you were never defined by how others treated you, but by how God formed you. You remember that when the worst came, He came closer, You remember that when all the doors shut, His remained open. You remember that your name was never forgotten in heaven, even when it was erased from their list of priorities. You remember that you are not the one who was left behind. You are the one who was lifted up. So walk forward, not in spite of what happened, but because of what it made room for. Walk forward, not bitter but bold, not broken but beloved. Carry not the weight of their absence, but the warmth of God's presence. For He, and He alone, is the reason your story is still being written with hope. Let them forget you. Let them underestimate you. Let them rewrite their version of events. It is of no matter now, because God wrote His truth across your pain, and that truth stands forever. You are loved, you are chosen, you are His, and He stayed when no one else did.